Yes, I know this is not how you pour a beer. But when you're holding the camera in one hand, this is exactly how you pour a beer. And you also don't drink tonic water before you drink a beer. But luckily, I have crackers. And Herzl to go with the crackers. Foam's good, buddy. Prost. Shit. Herzl, as I remember him, by Erwin Rosenberger. Herzl being the founder of Zionism. All right, let's go. Herzl, as I remember him. Probably too tipsy to read, but let's do it anyway. Chapter 33, Beer in Sight. Among the memorabilia I have preserved from my days on Die Welt, Die Welt is a rather plain-looking postcard bearing a picture of the Wailing Wall in Jerusalem and several Oriental figures postmarked Jerusalem 10/31/98. Hey, that's Halloween 1898. It is addressed to me and signed by Herzl and four others whose names were familiar to me. Do you say Joseph or Joseph? Joseph Seidenauer, Dr. Schnurr D. Wolfson, and Dr. Bodenheimer. Herzl and his colleagues were in Jerusalem on a very special mission. They had gone there to greet Kaiser Wilhelm II of Germany, who was touring the Holy Land. Herzl hoped to induce the Kaiser to take the Zionist movement under his personal protection and help promote Jewish immigration to Palestine. A personal audience in Jerusalem, moreover, would have a tremendous impact on world opinion. What I did not know when I received the postcard was that on the day it was written, Herzl was recovering from an attack of fever so severe that at one point his companions had despaired of his life. Nor did I know that he was racked by agonizing doubts. Would the Kaiser actually grant the audience which he had promised some weeks before? If not, the hoped for triumph would be turned into a bitter defeat and a blow to the prestige of the entire Zionist movement. At last, on November 2nd, the suspense was ended. Herzl was received by the Kaiser in Jerusalem. Here are excerpts from his account in issue number 46 of Die Welt for 1898. An event has occurred in our movement whose importance requires no explanation. I refer to the audience granted the Zionist deputation in Jerusalem by the German emperor. The audience was arranged at the beginning of October. In mid October, the five-man deputation set out for Palestine. This is the Palestine people claim doesn't exist. On November 2nd, the audience took place in the emperor's tent at Jerusalem in the presence of Secretary of State for Foreign Affairs von Bülow. His Majesty the Emperor replied in most friendly fashion to the words addressed to him by Dr. Herzl. We did not go to Palestine as pleasure seeking tourists or as explorers. We had a definite political purpose. When this had been accomplished, we immediately started home. Nevertheless, even during our brief stay, we were able to make some observations and take notes of conditions. Much of what we saw was dreary, but above the desolate, neglected countryside, a glorious sky beamed down, and wherever a human hand had stirred, a bountiful nature had cheerfully helped it to conjure forth swift abundance. The results achieved by our colonists, especially those who stand on their own feet, are simply astounding. All about, one still sees the stony, barren region into which one of these fine fellows plunged a few years before. He had coaxed an orange grove or a rich vineyard out of the wall. Oh, Jesus Christ, the soil. The Jewish farmers are tough and intelligent. That was our impression whenever we met them. Naturally, it was the picturesque details which struck us most vividly on our hasty trip. What's the novel? It's not a novel. It's Herzl, as I remember him. He was the founder of Zionism, which is curious because he's talking about taking Palestine. And this is 1898, and I've had too much beer. But we're getting to the point here. Their main stated goal in this book so far is that they would take Palestine. And I don't think they said it in a menacing way, but they were going to take Palestine. And I know there's some people out there that say Palestine never existed. And maybe not officially, but it did exist. Yet conclusions can be drawn even from these details. Yeah, he's talking about the colonization of Palestine. This is 1898. Herzl, who would die in 1904, was the spiritual founder of Zionism, even though, according to Erwin Rosenberger, who was his basically main man for his magazine Die Welt. I can't remember what Die Welt means, but it was the Zionist magazine. And they were going to take Palestine and they were going to create Jerusalem. I don't know, honestly, anything about 1898 Palestine, so I don't know if it was a barren land. It seemed to say that it was on the last page, so. Yet conclusions can be drawn. I probably shouldn't eat while I'm reading, but here we go. Yet conclusions can be drawn even from these details. The colonists are, for example, good riders. As we are arriving at Rehoboth, a troop of some 20 young people came galloping up to escort us to the settlement. They performed a kind of Arab fantasia around our carriages on their swift horses, and watching these sturdy, sunburnt lads whirl the horses around, dash off into the fields, and then ride shouting back, we could not help thinking of the cowboys of the American Wild West. Yeah, so far it's been a decent read. Unfortunately, we could visit only a few of the colonies, but we did get to know the Jewish farmer. He offers great promise for the future. Yes, we still believe, and more than ever since we were there, that this land, which is so magnificently endowed by nature, is a land of the future. This enchanting shore by the blue sea can be turned into a riviera by the civilizing force of large scale colonization. To be sure, huge investments are necessary. The country must be provided with all the latest transportation and hygienic facilities, but what scope it offers for the versatile, enterprising spirit of a people that is thoroughly familiar with all modern techniques that has been raised in every civilized land. And what a reward beckons at the end of these undertakings. Large investments of labor and capital are necessary. But labor bears golden fruits in this splendid clime, and capital, too, will bring a profit. On our hurried journey, we saw potentially fruitful plains and beautiful mountains. Everywhere nature is waiting. Conditions are waiting for the helping human hand, which should and can once more create gardens and comfortable homes for men and women. Jerusalem made a powerful impression on us. Even in its present decay, one still sees the traces of former beauty. And this city of many hills, which in some ways reminds one of Rome, could again become a magnificent metropolis. Looking down from the Mount of Olives, one can almost see the future city before one's eyes. Toward the end, Herzl's original manuscript refers to the fact that we have succeeded in arousing the interest of a gifted monarch in our just cause. The German adjective preceding monarch is genial, which has the force of genius like or possessing genius. Before giving the manuscript to the printer, however, Herzl struck out of a gifted genial monarch and submitted the words of two sovereigns. The original phrase, of course, was a reference to the Kaiser. The revised version was designed to include the Sultan of Turkey. And mind you, Zionism, according to this book, had two options. I think their two options were to set up the state of Israel in Turkey or in Palestine, and they chose Palestine. The Sultan, who at the time ruled Palestine, had to be mentioned, but Herzl had no desire to refer to him as genial, hence the neutral formula of two sovereigns. Wilhelm II was often described by his contemporaries as genial, since, unlike most other reigning monarchs of his day, he took a lively interest in the arts and sciences. Wilhelm Goldbaum, the pseudonymous spectator who had once so enraged Dr. Edvard Glaser, lavished frequent tributes on him in the pages of Die Welt, and once went so far as to hail his sovereign genius. All this was with Herzl's full approval. The Kaiser seemed for a time very kindly disposed toward Zionism, and no compliments were spared in the effort to enlist his sympathy even further. One day I told Herzl that readers of Die Welt were complaining about the eulogies to the Kaiser. Render on to the Kaiser what is the Kaiser's, he replied with a smile. When I reported further that my student friends were remarking that Die Welt smeared too much honey on the Kaiser's mouth, Herzl was ready with another quip. We should not be too stingy with honey when it is a question of winning the land that flows with milk and honey. Milk and honey, that is. How many chapters, or how many fucking pages is this? Whatever the precise extent of Herzl's admiration for the Kaiser, it was inevitably enhanced by the friendly, gracious manner in which the latter listened to his statement of the Zionist position. Herzl actually had two audiences with the German emperor in the fall of 1898. The first took place on October 18 in Constantinople, where the Kaiser had paused briefly en route to Palestine. This was followed by the November, a meeting in Jerusalem. What does that mean? This was followed by the November, a meeting in Jerusalem on October 28. Moreover, the Kaiser encountered Herzl at the Palestinian Jewish settlement of Mikveh Israel and stopped to exchange a few words. Herzl described the scene in his diary. Early yesterday morning, I rode out to Mikveh, Israel, about 9. A movement of the highway, which was filled with a mixed multitude of Arab beggars, women, children, and horsemen, heralded the approach of the imperial train. Fierce Turkish horsemen galloped up at full tilt, with threatening weapons and even more threatening glances. Then came the emperor's outriders, and finally, in a gray-clad group with several ladies, there was the emperor himself. I gave the mikveh student choir a signal to sing Hail to Three in Victor's wreath. I stood at one of the plows and removed my cork helmet. The emperor recognized me from a distance. He started slightly, directed his horse over to me, and stopped in front of me. I stepped forward 2 paces when he bent down over the horse's neck and held out his hand to me. I stepped up close to his horse, extended my hand, and stood before him with bared head. He laughed, and his imperious eyes flashed at me. How are you? Thank you, Your Majesty. I'm taking a look at the country. How has Your Majesty's trip been so far? He blinked hard. Very hot, but the country has a future. For the time being, it is still sick, I said. It needs water, a great deal of water, he replied. Yes, Your Majesty, irrigation on a large scale. He repeated, it is a land of the future. He may have said something more which I have forgotten, for I stood there several minutes. Finally, he held out his hand to me again and trotted away. The Empress, who had also ridden out in front a bit, nodded to me smilingly. Then the imperial train continued on its way amid the childish strains of Hail to Thee in Victor's wreath. Among those riding along behind, I recognized Lord Chamberlain Eulenberg, who greeted me pleasantly. The onlookers from Mikveh were utterly dumbfounded. Several asked who that was. The Reverend Heckler had played a considerable role in awakening interest in Herzl and winning him access to rulers like Wilhelm II. Heckler, who firmly believed that Herzl had been divinely appointed to lead the Jewish people back to the promised land, had dropped remarks at various German princely courts about a king of the Jews, a Mashiach who was about to fulfill the ancient prophecies. Among the noble ladies in particular, this sort of romantic talk stirred intense curiosity. Was there really an uncrowned king of the Jews, a new Moses who wanted to lead the Jews into the promised land? In his diary account of his audience with the Kaiser in Constantinople, Herzl tells of the following incident, which occurred as he was climbing the stairs to the reception room. I was now standing at the top of the stairs. Count Kessel looked tensely over my shoulder. Someone of note was evidently standing behind me on the portico. However, I did not turn around. Then we turned the corner, so that glancing to the right, I could see who it was, with Bulow behind a column, and had seen me come up. I bowed. She made acknowledgment and disappeared. Modesty prevented Herzl from making what would undoubtedly have been a more accurate statement. She had been standing with Bulow behind a column in order to see me come up. All right. Influential persons at the German court and to some extent the Kaiser himself had encouraged Herzl to believe that Wilhelm II planned to sponsor the Jewish people's return to Palestine. For a time, indeed, the Kaiser actually did entertain the idea. Not that he was a great lover of the Jews, but the notion of assisting in the fulfillment of ancient prophecies, of proving himself the instrument of God's will, and taking a great historic event under his personal aegis was one that appealed to him. In those days, monarch like Wilhelm, supposed to be monarchs, I think. In those days, monarch like William II, Wilhelm II, could still exercise a powerful influence on the course of history. And the private individual like Herzl, who hoped to make history, was compelled to court their favor. Herzl's natural diplomatic gifts fitted him admirably for his task. He knew how to preserve his personal dignity in dealing with the mighty of this earth, how to show himself their equal and yet avoid unseemly familiarity. It was as though an inner voice said to him, "You stand here as the spokesman of an ancient people, one which has been called the people of God. Show that you are worthy of playing this role." For all of us at Die Welt, the days which followed Herzl's return from Palestine were filled with tense anticipation of great events. Herzl himself was convinced that the ingathering of the exiles was indeed at hand after 2,000 years. He made no public statement, but among friends he freely voiced his glowing hopes. The fact that the Kaiser had as yet given no official sign of his intentions did not disturb Herzl. The mills of emperors, like those of gods, grind slowly. Herzl could already see gaily beflagged ships. Herzl could already see gaily beflagged ships crowded with joyful Jewish families weighing anchor in Mediterranean and other ports and setting out toward the east. I remember him spreading out a map of Palestine on his desk and debating whether the harbor at Jaffa or at Haifa was better suited to receive the immigrants. He had observed conditions at Jaffa on his recent trip, and though he had never been to Haifa, he had obtained detailed information about its harbor. As he tapped here and there on the map with his pencil, the rest of us stood and listened, caught in the spell of his enthusiasm. Herzl loved to let his imagination dwell on the immigrant ship with its happy human cargo. But his dreams were more ambitious yet. He foresaw ultimately a whole fleet of ships manned entirely by Jews and sailing from Jewish ports under the Jewish flag, which would bring the dispensed children of Israel back to the land of their fathers. Once he remarked to me, "Don't forget that our nearest neighbors to the north in ancient times were the Phoenicians, a race of stout hearted seafarers." Before long, however, sober reality, which isn't for me tonight since I'm drinking, before long, however, sober reality intruded upon Herzl's exuberant dreams of the future. And there's the train. The Kaiser's failure to proclaim his official sponsorship of the Zionist movement could no longer be overlooked. He had obviously decided not to support the Jewish return to Palestine. All our soaring hopes came fluttering down to earth. It was one of the most difficult periods in Herzl's life. Yet, like a commander who feels responsible for upholding his men's morale, he was able to conceal from us, to some extent, the bitter disappointment that he felt. Herzl was not one to be crushed by a defeat. So, to be laid permanently low by a cruel blow of feet. I can't even read. Herzl was not one to be crushed by a defeat, to be laid permanently low by a cruel blow of fate. He had, as it were, the spiritual elasticity of his people, whom history had taught that life is largely a series of unpredictable ups and downs. Herzl also inclined to the philosophical attitude that all is for the best. In our failure, there's also a success, he said to me regarding the German fiasco. They are obviously taking us seriously. The times are past when they used to laugh at us. Zionism is taken so seriously that the statesmen are afraid we might endanger international relations. We are no longer ridiculous, we are dangerous. In the subsequent conversation, he remarked, "Patience. Many roads lead to Jerusalem. They don't necessarily have to pass through Potsdam." And he added with some bitterness, "Raison d'état prevents the Kaiser from extending his protection to us." Again, it's that raison d'état. The modifier preceding raison d'état was one of those generally rendered as blankety blank. Despite his disappointment, Herzl recognized some of the factors which might explain and even excuse the Kaiser's behavior. The other powers, especially Russia, might become suspicious if Germany established a Jewish protectorate in the Near East. There was also the delicate question of German relations with Turkey, whose sultan was suzerain, I don't know that word, suzerain of Palestine. We were gratefully aware that the Kaiser had attempted to raise the issue of Zionism in several conversations with the Sultan, but each time Abdul Hamid had made it plain that the subject was distasteful to him. It was scarcely surprising that, faced with the choice of displeasing either the Sultan of Turkey or Theodor Herzl, the Kaiser had taken the latter course. Particularly since many of his advisors and courtiers were anything but sympathetic to Zionism. Whatever his irritation at the dictates of raison d'etat, Herzl bore the Kaiser himself no ill will. He was grateful for the latter's original good intentions, for the efforts he had made, and particularly for the personal sympathy he had shown Herzl at their meetings. When it became apparent that the Kaiser was no longer inclined to come forward as sponsor of the Jewish return to Palestine, Herzl made a last attempt to revive his flagging interest. He felt it his duty to the Jewish people not to let the unique opportunity slip from his grasp without a struggle. As soon as he saw that it was hopeless, however, he wrote the Kaiser off as a prospect, and the name Wilhelm II vanished from our conversational repertoire. Herzl never lingered on his way to bemoan a disappointed hope. He would adapt himself to the fact that what at first seemed the dawn of an era had proved merely a passing episode. Time would bring new opportunities. Was Herzl guilty of gullible stargazing in this whole affair? On the contrary, only an arch skeptic could have dismissed the impressive evidence pointing to success. On October 7, even before his audience with the Kaiser, Herzl had visited the latter's close confidant, Count Philip Eulenburg at Liebenberg Castle. There, Eulenburg told him that the Kaiser was very sympathetic towards Zionism and had fully accepted the idea of establishing a German protectorate over the Zionist movement. The Kaiser was also confident that he could obtain the Sultan's approval of large-scale Jewish settlement in Palestine. In addition, Eulenburg said he had won the influential support of German Foreign Secretary Bernhard von Bülow for Herzl's plans. When all this was followed by the Kaiser's display of keen personal interest at Constantinople and Jerusalem, Herzl could scarcely be blamed for thinking that his hopes and dreams were on the verge of fulfillment. And I will stop there since I think this is... it's not a very long chapter. Shall we continue, bruvs? Let me take another drink of beer. I'm actually shocked I made it this far. 34. While en route from Constantinople to Palestine for his second audience with the Kaiser, Herzl had made a stop at the Egyptian port city of Alexandria. A letter which he wrote from Alexandria to Dr. Siegmund Werner, then executive editor of Die Welt, clearly showed the high hopes with which he had undertaken the journey. Alexandria Harbor, October 24th, 1898. Dear Doctor, just a few words in great haste. You will soon learn all the facts about our expedition, which had to be kept a secret. For the time being, I can only tell you that a manuscript of some importance may arrive from Palestine for publication in Die Welt. The day it is mailed, I will send you a wire, manuscript dispatched, whereupon you should arrange to give it the top position in the next issue after its arrival. In any case, reserve all the best articles you have for that issue. Perhaps you will get a good feuilleton soon from L. Kellner, as well as a good week column from Erwin and a good World Chronicle. I will also wire you about the size of the press run. In the letter, Herzl used the words sensational and gala in referring to the issue, which was to contain his report from Palestine. Yet he did no more than hint mysteriously at the subject of the forthcoming report. Herzl was sometimes accused of deliberate secret mongering, since he really spoke about his future plans on behalf of Zionism and even drew the veil of secrecy over many things which he had already accomplished. The fact is, however, that he had excellent reasons for acting this way. If he gained a reputation for lack of discretion, he would lose the ear of the influential figures in various countries whose favor was so virtually important. Moreover, by blurting out the details of a project which was still in mid course, he would risk giving his enemies the means to block its successful completion. Herzl's journalistic background was also a factor here. As a newspaperman, he had long since acquired the habit of jealously guarding a piece of newsworthy information until the moment when it was to be made public. The care Herzl took to preserve the negotiations with the Kaiser for premature publicity is shown in a postscript to his Alexandria letter to Dr. Werner. Naturally, apart from my papa, the Colonel von Eis, then business manager of Die Welt and Rosenberger, no one is to know about this beforehand. Also, keep manuscript at the printers so that no one sees it in advance. I will send the manuscript special delivery to Bergman's print shop. That was Bergman's print shop. Under your name. It will come by way of Brindisi. On the way it is due, you will have to stay at the printers around the clock. Kindest regards to our dear Colonel and our doughty Erwin, and also to you from all my traveling companions. It will probably be the second issue in November. That is November 11. And that's going to be the end of this reading, since I'm nearly at 40 minutes. And that is my standard reading length.